Hello, people on the internet. Here I am today to do one thing and one thing only. That's right. I'm going to record like a couple of videos here talking about stuff in general. By stuff in general, I mean I wrote a book. Suing Scoob, really? Wow, incredible. You must be a special boy. I am. Okay, so right now, the book Wizard's Path Hollow's End is out for pre-order right now. And here I am discussing it in a semi-chronological order of things that happened, kind of. I'm going to record multiple videos just going through general layers of me making the story. Of course, I'm going to be starting here at the outlining phase. This technically isn't the first phase that happened, but it is the first one I'm going to be tackling because the actual first phase kind of goes into a bit spoilery territory of talking about motivations and inspirations for the story, and those kind of tie more into some of the core themes of what happened in the story, so that can be left for a bit later. So instead, I'm just going to generally go over the outlining process. This is an outlining guide. This isn't anything at all. I'm just going to have a casual conversation with the people out there for the fun of it. And also, because it's kind of fun and interesting. I like when people talk about things, and here I am talking about things. So I hope other people will like it when I talk about the things that happen. Okay, so starting off, I had the idea for the story a while back. It was probably about 6 months, maybe a year before I actually sat down to write it out and start the outline. So the idea is one that I had for a generally longer amount of time. Most ideas probably don't incubate for that long, but this one happened to do so. Not that I was working on it the whole time, obviously. It's just an idea that I had come up with and kind of developed a little bit and then left on the back burner as something to do later because I was currently busy with other projects. Then I had a funny idea meme. What if I tried to write another book? Because that's a thing I could do, I guess. And so I was like, okay, which thing here, which story here would be good to actually like pursue? And I was like, yes, this one's a good one. This one here, this one I can tell it's a good one. I had really wanted to write something more in my genre. This is a shonen action-adventure fantasy story, and that's pretty deep into my genre. Anything just shonen in general, a shonen battle manga specific, or battle series, I suppose, in this category is my genre, so I had really been wanting to write something that specifically highlights my strengths as a writer more so than what I had been working on, which had been basically just like random stuff that just like whatever I happened to think of I worked on. So this was more intentional, I should say, with the start of the outlining process. The first thing I want to bring up about this outlining process is that I may have grossly overestimated, or rather I should say underestimated, how long a chapter is. So I have this like idea in my head of how long a chapter is, and I can get the story to be that length successfully. Thing is, adapting chapters into like longhand written form did very, very much underestimated exactly how many words that equated to. So this book is 15 chapters long. It's also like 65,000 words long, which is much longer than most books I try to write end up being. 40,000 words is like where the sweet spot I find is. Longer than that, it's like, that's just like really long. That's just like a lot, my guy. That's just like a lot. So definitely having sit down and like structuring it as a 15 chapter book ended up having it be a very different process than structuring it as a 10 chapter book. It was 50% longer than it needed to be. And so we definitely got a different result because of it. If I were to sit down again, I probably would have structured it as a 10 chapter book. That means that there would have been differences. They're different in how much screen time certain characters get, and certain fight scenes that might or might not have been in, certain world building elements that may have been left on the floor or not. Right now, it's not like, I'm not saying it's worse off for being longer. In fact, it probably is technically better off for being longer. It's just that it's not necessarily how I would have structured it or would continue to structure things going forward. I much prefer to stick into that more tight range of a very specific amount each book kind of like goes around, rather than having one be just so much longer than everything else. It's just definitely a problem. And part of the problem was that when I actually sat down to start writing it, it just kept being longer and longer and longer, and I slowly started to realize like, oh, this is going to take a long time, isn't it? I had started outlining. I gave a whole day for outlining, which is generally the amount I would like to give to outlining in general. It's about just one day to mull things over, work on the outline. For me, an outline is approximately like 100 words outline is too short for me. That's like not quite enough for me to like grip onto. I definitely have to think about things more. The gears are turning in the head more when I have only 100 words to work off of when it comes to an outline. 1,000 words is about right. It might be a little bit too much at 1,000 words, but 1,000 words for a story, about the correct amount of outlining that needs to be done for me. Other people have different limits, or obviously I'm more of a creative in the moment writer. Other people are more outliners. So it's going to vary greatly, right? The thing is, when I sat down, I did outlining on Sunday, and I had set the goal of ending it and having finished the story next Sunday. I didn't quite get that done. I'll probably discuss that more in the actual like writing discussion portion of the next video I make, maybe. Didn't quite get that, primarily down to the fact that I just like didn't actually outline it correctly. I had it way too long, right? Problem. I'll try not to do that again. I'm already like structuring things around 10 chapter length instead, and even that, like that's pretty much every time getting me over the 40,000 word amount that I'm aiming for. So that's I for some reason this is like, yep, 15 chapters. That sounds about right. That's the correct number. It wasn't. Now, part of this outlining process, I had done something for this story that I had done for one other story before this. I had written, for the outlining of this other story, I had done a thing where I had written out the characters, then I had assigned them a color, I'd assigned them an animal, I assigned them a hobby, a gag, and a dream. Now, I did the same thing here. This time I didn't use animal, instead I used, like, I think I probably just put their class next to their name just to remember what their class is. But this outline idea that I've been working with, and I've done it more since working on this story, of just having the name and like filling in these couple of blanks on the character before I start working with them. Obviously, I already have the character like conceptually down. Like this character acts like this, they do this type of thing, they are this style of character. But adding this extra layer of like, these are the type of gags they have, these are the type of dreams they have, this is the type of hobby they have, fleshes out the character a little bit more, and I feel lends a little bit more weight to them at times. I'm unsure how necessary it is because these things kind of just develop naturally, but for a story like this that has a huge cast of characters, you might not have time to really like fully flesh them out just like through the writing process. So you kind of might want to like spend a little bit more time working on them during the outlining stage as to make sure that you have this good grasp on the character before you sit down and start writing, which really was necessary to this type of story that had a massive cast of characters. Like the main cast is like 5+ big, it's decent sized main cast. And then like the supporting cast and the side characters like bring the total up to like 20 characters or something. So each character needed to like have some time in the incubation chamber for them to feel fully fleshed out. So I'm glad I did it for this story. Again, I'm unsure about like how necessary it is, but for this style of like large cast shonen action adventure story, I feel like it's very beneficial to like get a couple of those things down, and it ended up making some of the characters have aspects to them that made them a bit more unique and made them have interactions with other people that were a bit more nuanced. And a couple of the really good scenes that actually came from the story were just strictly because of the fact certain characters had certain hobbies, and those kind of like bounced off the situation really well. Of course, other character hobbies didn't even really come up. Like you can notice them if you're paying attention, but it's like not blink if you miss it, but like if you're not really thinking about like, oh, this is clearly something this character likes to do. If you're not thinking in those terms, you're not necessarily even going to notice that that's a hobby of theirs, right? And same thing with the dreams thing. Like people don't generally like say, this is what my dream is. It's shonen, so it's a little bit more like that, but generally people aren't going to like just state that. So you kind of have to like imply it through like their actions and what they're talking about for the future and just generally what they're going about. So like there's things that don't necessarily come up except for the readers that are paying attention. And so I'm unsure about the necessary value of it, but I still feel it's important for those readers who are going to be paying attention, who are going to get more out of the story, to like paying attention to each line of dialogue, paying attention to each scene, and like adding these things together to paint this more clear picture of the characters. Another thing I had to do for the outline is I had to figure out what each character was capable of. Because this is a story where characters have different powers, and each character has their own kind of unique abilities. There are certain characters that can share powers with each other, but because there's so many different classes of wizards, which is essentially just how the system works, right? There's fire wizards, ice wizards, death wizards. Each of them can have specific spells they have in common between other people of the same class, but even then, almost every character has almost wholly unique abilities. Like, there's a couple that are very similar and a few spells that every wizard learns. But outside those, pretty much everyone is going to bring a different type of ability to the table. So figuring out those beforehand is kind of important. Not as important for me to do, but I can understand how other people would need to do that. Like, oh, this person might have a dozen different abilities. I need to know what each of them are to know what they can and can't do in different situations, and so it stays consistent. And even then, like, because of the fact that characters can have so many different abilities, if you're not like front loading them up front, it still feels kind of off. Like, oh, this character is using this ability. Like, oh yeah, I guess they did use that ability earlier in the story. In this situation, it's just I kind of forgot about it because they only did it once or they only did it twice. So it's not something the reader might not even be really thinking about when it comes back into play in a more major way during the narrative. I don't know really a way around that. Like, again, like, having them use the ability and clearly showing that, oh, this character has the ability to do this, okay, I'll remember that. An astute viewer, or astute reader, is going to pick up on that, right? Whereas a less astute one might not necessarily pick up in the same way, and it can feel a little bit out of nowhere when characters have so many different abilities. So, at least, like, writing them all down early on in the process and knowing exactly what they can do can help you remember, like, oh, this character needs to show off they have this ability in a different situation, so people kind of have an understanding of what the character is capable and not capable of doing. Of course, there's some things just like, this person is an ice wizard. Oh, they made some ice. That makes sense. This person's fire. Oh, they shot some fire. Okay, I think I understand. Like, certain things are just like common knowledge. Other things I feel need a little bit better setup, and having it outlined at the very beginning I feel helps solidify that, okay, I need to show off these abilities and show off what the characters can do, so the audience going into a fight can know exactly the options available to the character at any given time. But even with that said, characters still haven't shown off every ability they have. I don't think that's a problem going forward. I already know how some of these characters will show off these abilities outside of a fight context, so people know what they can do. It's just that when you have a dozen characters and each of them can do a dozen different things, it's just you can't always like get them all in like in a good manner just in the first chapter. Like, you could just have every character come out and say, hey, I can do this thing, and this thing, and that works in certain stories in certain situations. This probably though isn't like one of those stories where that really works out too well. Just something to think about, just food for thought generally. Another thing that I didn't have to outline but just like was good to keep in mind was just generally like things about the world, like understanding that like names of things generally rhyme, or there's some more biblical connotations, or like the fact that these characters aren't going to ever say certain types of words because those words wouldn't have been invented. Just keeping some of those things in mind. This is less of an outlining phase and more so of the actual writing phase, but it's just like good to like understand some of those things. Understand like, oh, they're not going to say the word God ever because their like belief system doesn't have a God. They have like maybe gods, or they have like celestial bodies, or they have like a giant spaghetti monster comes down and like absorbs them into the mass, but like they're not going to use those type of terms. And so that's something to keep in mind, especially because it becomes really annoying when there's like certain phrases or words you can't use, which is what pretty much anyone would use in certain situations. And I don't know, it's definitely a problem you have to like run into and hit over and over again before you're like, okay, I just have the biggest vocabulary in the world and can draw anything and make any situation using any word, because you don't know what your characters can or can't say based off of the differences between the worlds. Again, kind of not an outlining thing, kind of is an outlining thing. It really depends on if you're more of a like real-time writer or a outliner, because an outliner is probably going to outline some of these things and understand, okay, these characters aren't going to say these words, these are words they can't say, these are words they can say, or these are like replacement words for them. Whereas a in-the-moment writer probably is just going to have to like get there and be like, ooh, how are they going to say this thing that I only know how to say like a couple different ways, and none of them work in this situation. Just a thing to think about. Depending on the outline. Maybe I should have thought about that more. Nah, it's good. I'm cool, fam. I'm just being cool. I kind of want to officially say that I've gotten good at character names at this point. I feel like every character name in the story works well for what it is doing, and some of them work very well. And I've gotten to the point where I'm just happy with character names in general. But with that said, last names are still hard. And last names are still very hard, because last names are either going to be random or not random, and both are bad. Either you have a character like, this is first name, oh, that fits the character well, I understand it, it's good, I can see how that character has that name, and a last name, which is either completely random, which is not the best choice, or a name that does fit the character, which is weird, right? Like having a character like, oh yes, that person has a fighting last name and they're a fighter. It's kind of weird, but like in this universe, having names like that makes kind of sense. So like I didn't have to worry about too much here, but I can definitely see that's going to be a problem going forward, coming up with last names. Last names are hard. I used to be talking about first names are hard, so I've made progress. I've made good progress. First names conquered. Last names, hopefully we'll never have to do middle names, because I don't even know, my guy. I don't even know how I would manage to do that, my dude. It's so hard. It takes so long to come up with names. I've realized in this story, I have to come up with names during the outlining phase. I just have to. I came up with most of them, but the couple I didn't come up with, I was like, ooh, I have to come up with a name now. Let me stop writing and go on research a name to put here, which is a mistake I continue to make even now. So, I didn't learn anything. A couple of good things that came from the outlining is the backstory of the world and the backstory of certain races in the world. It didn't really come into play too much in this volume, but in volumes coming forward, it's definitely important. Not to say that like the elements wouldn't have worked even if I hadn't come up with these things. It's just that the world feels more fleshed out and feels a bit more lived in having some of this information and being able to use it in certain scenes that give it a bit more weight, give it a bit more gravitas, if you will. So definitely coming up with some of these like historical things that have happened in the world had helped in the story. Again, we're talking like a couple of sentences here or there, but like they ended up actually contributing to the story in a decent amount in certain ways that I didn't even expect. Like I ended up having a character that has an interest in history, so them actually having history they can reference that I already have written down, it turned out to be like a useful thing that managed to make the story feel better. But like I didn't even realize that was going to happen until it actually already happened. So again, good. Probably better. It ended up better than it would have, and really, I may have even gone a little bit too hard in the history. Like, maybe instead of having like 2 paragraphs, 1 paragraph would probably have been enough. But like, we're not exactly speedrunners saving off 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there. Although that is the final form of every writer, is becoming the ideal ultimate speedrunner. So, there's a 30-second time split to get there. Let's go. I'm just like looking over the actual outline itself right now. Seeing some of these things make sense, like certain dates, certain times, different types of schools, different things that haven't even been brought up in the story yet, general structure things. It really is like a general outline. I get it. It makes sense. There's not too much more to go over. Just, again, a lot of like, this thing happens, this thing happens, this thing has to happen for that thing to happen. A lot of just like making sure that it makes sense, things flow in each other naturally, and kind of importantly, that the story can like get into a good place and stay into that good place and not lose momentum as it's going forward. That's something I had to focus on here, and something I wish I'd focused on more in the initial outlining stage that I did on one day. Because like the story kind of has some ups and downs in it. There's kind of like peaks and valleys, which is okay for this like type of story, and it's okay for the type of narrative. And certainly, it being 15 chapters, it has to have some down moments, and it can't just stay like up the whole time. There has to be some down moments in there. But certainly, there could have been a little bit more structure to it that could have given it better weight and given it better flow and timing for certain things to happen. And just like moreover, like I already understand that the next book, it's going to be way betterly structured and just like way stronger than the first book. And like I kind of look at it and say, why couldn't the first book have been that good? And like that is just the problem when you're writing series in general. It's like, oh, now that I have everything figured out, everything's so much easier and better. But like, why can't I get it earlier? Probably because it's like a lot harder, it takes a lot more skill, it takes a lot more planning and time, and just generally is a learning experience. And I think I understand better now that like going forward, I'm probably going to have to come up with like ways for the story to progress in a satisfying way and not to be shackled down by certain elements of the plot. That's probably the main thing. Like setting it in a school was a hard thing to work around and was really difficult. And I think to a trained writer, is probably the most noticeable element of like, oh, they struggled with the fact that this was in a school. And I did. I really struggled with the fact this was set in a school. And like working within those confines was really hard. And I just probably needed to plan that out better and figure out ways to work around that in order to get a more satisfying story without like just slamming my head against a brick wall the whole time. So at the start of the outlining, if I just sat down and said, okay, they're in a school, this is not going to be easy to work with, what are some workarounds I can use? I probably would have had an easier time with the story, but you know, retrospect is retrospect. That's primarily what I've gotten out of the outlining. I could have probably like used my resource allocation a little bit better, identified problems before they actually became problems and actually tackled them while outlining, and probably spend a little bit less time on certain things that like I already had down. Again, like even just figuring out like using older outlining systems and bringing it into a new story works, and that helps me get on the path more directly. And the more I spend time outlining, the easier it becomes, the more ways I figure out how to tackle it, and the more I can actually identify problems before they come up. So it definitely is like a learning experience, but like that main thing is like identifying those problems before they become problems, identifying what in the setting is going to make it harder to write, and figuring out workarounds for it, I feel is vitally important going forward. That's pretty much the outlining. Not much to actually discuss because again, it's like just a couple of days of work, and like a lot of the interesting parts are harder to get into the nitty-gritty detail or like really point out exactly, especially avoiding any spoiler talk, which I feel I did fairly well, but even this is a little bit more swirly than I necessarily would have wanted it to be. Overall, that was the outlining process for this book. It was interesting, learned some things, didn't learn some other things, realized that, hey, once you overcome one obstacle, there's going to be another obstacle that's even worse that you have to tackle now. And, cool. I like that. I like that. That is a thing, I guess. Neat. This was a discussion on a topic that we had. Cool. What's the next videos? The next videos are cool as well. Bye. Subscribe. Go pre-order the book or something. Buy the book. I don't know. Read it. Tell me things that are neat. Yes. Bye. Ooh.